Educational Communications and this station present Environmental Directions with Nancy Pearlman. On this series, we explore the effects of human influence on the Earth's ecosystems and discuss solutions to environmental problems which affect the quality of life on this planet. Environmental Directions gives you the kind of information you need to help you participate in decisions impacting your community, the nation, and the world. Now, here's your host, Nancy Pearlman.
We're going to be talking about animal rights with my guest, Craig Wesco. He is an activist with LA Animal Save, Anonymous for the Voiceless, and he is engaged with protests against horse racing, circuses with animals, animal liberation marches. He is founder of Swords to Plowshares, an organization that is faith-based for love of all creation, and he is a former product promoter. Welcome. It's a pleasure to have you with us.
Thanks for having me.
You are obviously concerned about both domesticated animals and wildlife and how they are treated, particularly by human beings. Is one animal more important where you're trying to save the cows or the pigs or the elephants at the circuses?
I wouldn't say any animal is more important than others, but my primary focus is raising awareness and changing people's attitudes toward animals as a whole.
What is that focus that you want us to change? Because you obviously are using a Christian biblical basis for your love of animals.
Yeah, for me it's faith-based. For a lot of other people it's just strictly love-based. And I think the primary thing that I'm trying to do is to get people to see animals not just as commodities to be exploited, but as individuals that can be shown love and compassion.
So you are organizing discussions and talks at vegan locations that aren't utilizing meat or dairy for food?
Yeah, in fact, I have partnership with a vegan restaurant where I do Bible studies there, and I'm also part of a lot of different animal activist groups who promote these kinds of dialogues with people to get people to change their attitudes and their lifestyles to no longer be contributing to the torture and enslavement and slaughter of animals.
And what city are those gatherings in?
Most of them happen in Los Angeles and some surrounding cities. Bible study is in Colton.
I know that you attend a lot of protests, a lot of marches, and there's been a lot of attention over the 30-plus horse deaths at Santa Anita Racetrack. But you maintain that there are horse deaths every year at almost every racetrack in the nation. Is that really true?
Yeah, I don't have the statistics in front of me, but I know just in California, there are other racetracks that have a similar problem, and it's a recurring problem too. So even the measures that they take to try to minimize the deaths and the injuries of horses, it's not solving the problem because the problem is inherent in the racing industry.
Horses have to be trained to race, although they will gallop away on their own, because I had a horse and he liked to take off sometimes when I didn't want him to.
Yeah, I mean, horses definitely love to run, but they don't want to be overgrown to where they can't support the muscle mass in their legs, and then being whipped in order to run and things like that. So there's a big difference between what horses have to endure in the horse racing industry and what horses just love to do naturally.
And of course, if there wasn't an audience for the races, they would disappear.
Absolutely. And so we're trying to get people to change their focus instead of seeing horses as entertainment, bet on and things like that, to instead find some other source of entertainment.
One form of entertainment that I grew up with were circuses with animals, particularly wild animals. But we're well aware now that most of them are kept in very small cages, are trained in a very cruel manner, and there is a movement to eliminate wild animals from circuses. Perhaps maintain the dogs or the cats or the domesticated animals for the shows.
Yeah, so there's an inherent problem with exploiting animals for entertainment, and that's the underlying basis for circus protests. But also, there's some very cruel treatment toward animals.
Doesn't organic agriculture, permaculture, and sustainable agriculture incorporate some animals in terms of utilizing their manure for fertilizer, having them be part of eating the bugs that might eat the plants and letting them be?
Well, actually, there's this thing called veganic agriculture or veganic gardening, where you actually don't incorporate animals at all. But then a lot of other kind of plant agriculture utilizes manure and things like that, but not manure that's outsourced from slaughterhouses and things like that. Instead, it's just free-ranging animals that are not exploited for food or anything like that, that just naturally provide these things.
The animal rights movement has so many different divisions and people who don't even want us to have our companion animals, our pets, our cats and dogs, to those, of course, who want to utilize animals in a humane way. How do we bridge this range of activism so that animals are loved and protected?
I think that there's not as much of a divide as it might seem. I think that a lot of it has to do with the term pet, which kind of suggests ownership. And as a vegan, I don't believe in owning another being. I believe in taking care of another being. So, for instance, rescuing an animal, being a guardian, or having the animal as your companion that you take care of, I think that's good stewardship. And that's what I believe is what we should be doing, in fact, be doing more of. But what I'm against, and what I think most vegans are against, are seeing animals just as commodities. So if you, let's say, buy a rabbit for your child on Easter, and then, a few months later, when the bunny gets too big, you dump it off in a shelter or whatever. That kind of attitude toward animals is what we're against.
And what's even worse is when people don't want one of these animals, rabbits, dogs, cats, and they drop them off in a wilder area or a park, and they become feral, and they have a tough time surviving.
Yeah, that's still, I guess, better than the alternative, which is just filling up a shelter with animals and then having them euthanized. You're at least giving them a fighting chance. But the other thing that we're against is the pet trade industry. So oftentimes whenever you buy a dog or a cat from a breeder or a puppy mill, instead of adopting one from a shelter, those animals end up in these shelters and end up euthanized. And also, if you have the means to adopt an animal, you want to adopt one that is on death row, right? There's no reason to be supporting a puppy mill, things like that.
What's interesting are that some of the domestic animals that many people eat are actually quite intelligent and can be those companion animals. Pigs, for example. Cows. Some countries, cows are sacred. Pigs aren't eaten by some cultures, by some groups of people, but eaten by others. Here, we have these horrible factory farms. I hate to call them farms because they're not farms. They're just inhumane factory facilities.
Yeah, it's horrible. And in fact, the Yulin Dog Festival is going on right now in China. So people are often up in arms about what other countries are doing to dogs, because we have a different attitude toward dogs here.
That festival is where they do kill them to eat.
Yes, we do the same things to pigs, which when you look at them side by side, they have such very similar attributes and such very similar temperaments. And so the kind of things that we're doing to cows and to pigs and things like that are really no different than what those other countries are doing to dogs.
Is there one corporate agriculture group that's worse than another?
I wouldn't say they're worse. Like some, treat animals bad. Like some it's a factory farm, and others it's a factory farm where they beat and kick the animals. But really it's wherever you put your money, because they're corporations and they're just trying to make a profit. And they're doing so by treating animals essentially as inhumanely as possible because it's more cost effective to do that. So if you have a tiny little cage where the animal just has enough space to survive, then that's the most cost-effective way. So as long as we're funding animal agriculture at all, we're funding animal cruelty.
You're involved with so many protests. You go to marches. You're carrying your signs for trying to end animal use in circuses, to try and stop the improper dairy use, the killing of animals for meat, the horse racing, and trying to stop the use of animals for testing. Do these protests really make the difference? Or do we need new laws?
Well, they do make a difference, and in fact, they influence the laws. Because if enough people care and they contact the politicians and other people in office, then those people, those elected officials, will in some cases reflect the views of the people that voted them into office. Now, there's a lot of money involved and lobbying and corporate subsidies and things like that. that make the changing of the law a long task. Primary purpose is to change people's attitudes, because if we're purchasing animal products, they will continue to be supplied by companies trying to profit. Whereas if we change people's attitude to where they don't want to purchase these animal products, instead they want to purchase products that are plant-based and don't involve animal cruelty, then everything else will follow.
You're also concerned about animals being used in testing, and we know that new products, whether or not it's cosmetics or detergents or soaps or even medicine, needs to be tested for safety's sake. But we also know that there are so many new computer programs and alternatives that we don't need to test on animals.
Yeah, it's actually a pretty archaic practice. If you look into the data, the testing on animals for these things, it doesn't even correlate with the safety of the product on humans in most cases. So it's really just done as a thing that we've been doing for many years, and there's really no purpose for it anymore.
I've been interviewing people from different faiths and how their belief system is geared to protecting our environment and the plants and animals on this planet. Almost all of them seem to say we need to care about our ecosystems. We need to care about other life. You're coming from the Christian faith. What does it say about loving animals and taking care of our environment?
Yeah, my organization is s2p.org. What I do is I promote a faith-based love for all creation. And so in the Bible, there's plenty of evidence to suggest that God wants us to love animals and take care of them and to not harm them. In fact, in the very beginning, in Genesis 1:29 through 31, that's where God gives us dominion and then tells us to eat a completely plant-based diet of fruit and the herb of the ground, and then tells us to take care of the animals and to feed the animals. And then in Genesis 2:15, it says to be gardeners. So it's always been God's plan, according to the Bible, for us to be caretakers of the earth and all its inhabitants. And I believe when Jesus says to love your neighbor as yourself, well, the animals also were created to inhabit this earth alongside us. So loving your neighbor as yourself shouldn't just extend to other people, but also to our animal neighbors.
So you founded this organization, Swords to Plowshares. That comes from a biblical concept?
Yeah, it's in a few different Old Testament prophecies. One is Isaiah 2, verse 4, where it says, they will beat their swords into plowshares and their spears into pruning hooks. They will no longer learn war. And so the idea is, instead of building weapons to use against our neighbor and against animals, instead we will be growing food to feed to our neighbor and the animals.
When you march for animal liberation, what are you truly marching for? What kind of liberation of the animals?
Well, it's actually all kinds of things. The most pressing one is using animals in animal agriculture. So there's no reason to be using animals for food. There's plenty of plant-based alternatives that are healthier, better on the environment, and certainly better for animals. But also things like animal testing and fur trade. Those are other common ways that animals are exploited and harmed needlessly. So animal testing is something that the law still requires in many instances in order to have your product reach the market, and it's just not necessary. There's so many alternatives to animal testing that are more effective as well, not to mention how inhumane they are.
I always maintain that the fur looks better on the animal that was born with it. Even though it feels good, it looks beautiful, it looks even better on the animal itself. But what do I do with that mink stole from my great-great-aunt that I inherited?
I agree with you that it looks better on animals. I think it looks ugly on people because, it's violence. That's all I see. Well, I guess with anyone's dead body, what do you do with it? You bury it. So I guess I would bury that coat.
Is there a way to see you out there on the streets protesting?
Well, I upload my videos to YouTube. It's s2p-org, so it's similar to the website s2p.org, but here it's a dash instead of a dot.
You certainly are leading by your lifestyle, by your beliefs. You're trying to get others to adopt new behaviors to protect all these creatures on the planet. I want to thank you for that effort. I want to thank you for being a guest on my show.
Well, thank you for having me. I appreciate you allowing me to speak up for this cause that I believe in. I believe that it's all about love. It's all about showing love toward others, whether that's other people or other animals. I think that that's the only real way out of this situation of suffering and cruelty that we find ourselves in this world.
Thank you for your love of all the life on this planet. I have been speaking with Craig Wesco, who is an activist with LA Animal Save, Anonymous for the Voiceless, and founder of Swords to Plowshares. I'm Nancy Pearlman. Thank you very much for joining us, and do tune in again next week.
If you would like free information about these environmental issues, go to www.ecoprojects.org or call 310-559-9160. Environmental Directions with your host, Nancy Pearlman, is a community affairs program of the nonprofit organization Educational Communications and this station.